So maybe I should start from giving you some context.
Great.
Okay, so I am Lucy Haze, the biggest Polish trans streamer and number one President Sunday orbiter, as you can see by the looks of things. And I am having a panel next week about affirmative action. More uh, I'll give you a little bit more details about it, okay? Before we begin.
Sure.
Well, maybe in the meantime, you introduce yourself, even though probably everybody here knows who you are already, but by all means.
Sure. So I go by Pearl, and I am a PhD psychometrician. And I've spent a lot of time studying, as most psychometricians have to, the impacts of how our scores are used and what student test scores look like between different groups of students, most notably with respect to race and socioeconomic status. Um, and that ties in very closely, obviously, to affirmative action, both in why we are at a point where we're talking about it and what it means, and in my opinion, how it's kind of a band-aid for what we already know is going on, but that no one wants to talk about, which is systemic and systematic racism.
Right. So I will give you the thing. So the Supreme Court is going to drop decision very soon on affirmative action, where they have a real chance of overturning Rutter versus Bollinger, a 2003 case that upheld race being able to play a limited role in college admissions. So the question will be, what is people's opinion on affirmative action, and we'll be discussing that based on this premise. Probably gonna be, should it be overturned or not? So yes.
Okay.
Also, there's an extra detail about this panel which might be of interest to you. Our favorite person in the world, not so erudite, is going to be part of this panel.
Oh,
That's right.
well,
That's right.
I
That's right. There's a twist. And
That's
I've been
interesting.
informed that the person that organizes this panel does not know what not so erudite's position on the thing is.
Well, I think I could probably hazard a guess.
Oh, by all means. I actually wanted
Um,
to ask you about it, to be honest.
yeah, my suspicion is that they will not be in support of affirmative action just based on other things, but I also think that they will use a weak argument. Um, the easiest argument to throw at the wall, which is, why should someone get preferential treatment because of their uh, racial background, and with the assumption that that's taking away one of their spots.
Right.
So
Like,
I'm if I had to lay money on it, if I was a betting person, that's how I would suspect they would argue.
I've been seeing, because I've been advised to just watch a Destiny thing on affirmative action to get more or less not so erudite's beliefs on the thing. And I've been hearing arguments like, which to me are a little bit silly, but when is enough? What's the limit? As in, how far should affirmative action go before the situation is equalized between the peoples? Which is a bit,
I mean,
which is a bit,
it's a go ahead.
which is a bit and from my perspective, it's a bit silly because, as I understand it, it's supposed to equalize the harm that's been going on for quite a long time. And the expectation that the harm will be equalized in a fraction of the time of the harm being done seems pretty unrealistic to me. So asking now what the limit is seems a bit premature when it comes to equalization, because it wasn't
Yes.
census strict about affirmative action. It was how much equalizing is enough before we assess that now people are on equal footing, which is
So I have a couple of responses to that. So one, you could argue the statistical merits of saying, well, when everything in K through 12 testing scores or college admissions is equaling the representative percentages of whatever group in question that we have in the United States. So do you have a representative sample? That's one answer. But that also then kind of necessarily suggests that it's never ending, because the demographics are continuously changing. And when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when you hear about a company or a school talking about it, inherently the folks at the top are still considering it a checklist. Are we talking about it? Okay, we're done now. No. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not a checklist. And neither is affirmative action.
right.
And I think if you take a few steps back, specifically when it comes to education, because that's my expertise and that's where I know the history the best.
Right. Well,
So,
we will be on the panel will be focusing on the school admissions. So
okay. So in my opinion, affirmative action is just yet another band-aid so that we as a society don't have to acknowledge what 20 or more years of data have shown, which is that systemic racism
yeah,
and systematic, both of them. There is a difference between those terms, and we
yeah.
have both
Even
that
though
are playing.
people often use them interchangeably, but yeah, they are
Right.
different.
We have both, and it's built that way. This system, the educational system, is absolutely built out this way. You also have standardized assessment, which has been built this way. And let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean. I was trying to look up the exact date, but it's very difficult because Florida now has so many lawsuits going on over education because of Ron DeSantis. But in the 70s, potentially 60s, and I will get this for you. There was a lawsuit over their math assessment being biased against Black students.
Right.
One of the math teachers,
Mathematics. Yes.
mathematics, yes.
Okay.
And this was high school. This was for a graduation, high school graduation
Exam.
assessment. So, yes. So a lawsuit was brought because there were very large differences in the passing scores and overall percent correct for white students versus Black students.
Well, what was the bias? How did it How did? Can you go into the details of
Sure.
technically?
Yes. So first of all, the assumption was that the test itself was biased. How can an item be biased towards one group or another? So let me just give an answer on that. So if I tell you, out of this battery of 20 items, the third item is biased toward white males. What that means is that I've taken another group of students who got a similar score on the test. Okay, so let's say I'm taking all of the students that got 18 out of 20 correct. Now I'm going to break that group of students into males and females or whatever, some sort of binary grouping, okay, which is problematic, but that's how it's done. So, and white males are always the base comparison. This is called differential item functioning, the name of the analysis. It's one of the ways that they detect bias in items. This is statistical bias.
Right.
So what that means is For a group of students who performed similarly overall, is there a different likelihood for the two groups that we're looking at to get item 3, which is the one we're looking at, right or wrong? If there's a higher percentage for females to get that item correct over males that overall did the same, then we would say that that item is biased toward females, okay? Or if you're taking it, so this is generally done based on race and gender. Again, problematic, right? Because first of all, they only consider 2 genders when this is being done, and this is even now, and still it's always a pairwise.
Right.
So when I talk about equity and measurement, I mean it across the board. There is none when it comes to any way that you could identify yourself. The assessment is built for white men, always. That's just how that's how it was. So now let's get back to the Florida case. So the assumption was that the items themselves were biased, okay? And so a group of parents and teachers sued and said this test is biased. Turns out it was not. What was biased was the education that those students were receiving.
Okay.
That led, which is not generally the finding, okay? Normally we are able to detect this in the test. This was very much around the civil rights move. This was like in the 60s or 70s.
By biased, sorry to interject. By biased education, do we mean worse quality of education received?
Yes,
or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They were not receiving the education necessary to even be able to come close to being able to achieve a passing score on this test.
Right.
So it was not that the items themselves were biased, which was what the initial argument was, and also which is largely the problem that we have now. Well, we have both problems still, right? But that was a really important landmark case because that's what started a lot of the things that led up to Title IX and making sure that there were all sorts of ways to make sure that the funding for women and minorities and school districts that were largely populated by non-white people were getting the adequate funding, okay? This plays into longer term issues though, because standardized test scores are included in websites like Zillow and Realtor.com to then push down the value of people's houses based on the student test scores, okay?
So when sorry, can you what? Excuse me.
Okay, so when I tell you this is systemic and systematic, okay? So
people's scores affect housing prices?
Yes, 100%. So if you go on Zillow and look in any neighborhood, okay, in the United States, it's going to give you a public school score. That public school score is based on their average test scores and the number of students who are ranked proficient and the number of students who are getting free or reduced lunch.
So technically speaking, parents can have a high score, they can have children, and if they do bad at school, the house score will drop?
Yes, if the school district, it'll be a district-wide thing, but yeah, so if I'm looking to buy a house in my current neighborhood and I look at this, one of the things that is going to pop up without me doing any additional searching on Zillow will be a school score. And so I might say, oh, I really like that house. What a great yard. But I might choose not to move there because their school is not performing as well as one that might be one district over or one neighborhood over. That is, so those math scores and those
and that's in big cities as well.
That's every city. If you're on Zillow, if you're on Realtor.com, if you're on Trulia, if you're on any real estate website, Redfish, all of them, they pull in a neighborhood score and a school district score, and you can look and see what that score is. They don't within that app tell you what that score is based upon. So what numbers are they bringing in to give you that metric? And they don't give any other context. That also impacts enrollment.
So different from Poland, where people just move into the house and just find the best reputable school in the vicinity, you know, in the neighborhood that they can find, and that's it. When it comes to they just look there under at the reputation of the school itself, not at the reputation of kids that live in the neighborhood. That feels strange, you
It is
know?
strange, and not it's not necessarily representative of what the quality of that school is,
Yeah,
because an assessment is not a fail-safe. And this is coming from somebody who's made their living on making assessments for students. It's a tool. Okay, it's one tool in a very large toolbox that we should be looking at to examine school and education. But
and aren't there school rankings? And
there are tons of school rankings. They are easy to play around with. So, for example, if you look at the top 10 list of high schools that comes out every year, I think it's Newsweek is the one that does it.
Newsweek,
It's
right?
it's a big ranking that comes out, and you'll notice that the majority for the last 10 years, look at how many of those schools are under the basis ed, BASIS.ed
Right,
umbrella. They are a charter school. I worked for them, so I know a lot about this. They are a charter school organization out of Arizona. They have gamed the system. So
right.
the Newsweek system uses the number of students getting fours and fives on AP exams. That is their sole ranking system. Okay.
Hmm.
So BASIS started making sure that ninth graders were taking the AP exam. So now they've got 4 years worth of kids in each school taking the AP exam, which is now double the number because most schools you don't take an AP exam until 11th and 12th grade. So BASIS has gamed the system, and that's why so many of their schools they also have a very difficult curriculum,
Wow.
and so they're able to filter out. If you look at the demographics of their schools, they're primarily Asian and white, and we're also going to talk about the Asian and white
Yeah,
achievement gap because
it's very interesting.
that's
Like
also important
someone
in this
said here,
conversation.
Karasu said here in the chat. So yeah, family planning and schooling, you have similar issues in a sense in France, Paris, as far as I know. Like I've actually heard today when I was waiting for my mom at the coffee shop, a person this because I assume this goes for high school as well, right?
Yes.
Yes, so I heard a parent discussing his son's high school and the choice that he was making, and the biggest consideration was that it had to be a school in the center on or in their neighborhood, and it had to be good, and that's basically it. That
That's what it needs to be.
not having to travel far was the biggest consideration.
And there's
So
value in that. There's value in community schools. There's huge value in community schools and being able to interact with the parents of
oh,
your kids'
it's a bit different with
friends.
in Poland. I know it's
Uh,
a bit different with primary schools and high schools because usually with primary school you just sort of kind of get assigned to your nearest school, and
mhm.
with high school you get you the choices start and you go through
It's
exams, etc.
it's somewhat similar here, but the districts and it varies from state to state how much freedom you have. But certainly in elementary school, there are more of them, so it is easier to go based on location. But the one of the first and most salient predictors of college success, so let me be very clear about that, college success, is whether or not your parent, one of them, just one, volunteers in elementary school classrooms while you're a student there.
Damn.
That's it. It doesn't take a lot. The second is mother's college education and whether or not they work full time. And it's actually best if they don't work full time. So those are the two biggest predictors. Highly correlated, obviously, with
But
socioeconomic status. I want to talk about
when
that
it
too.
comes to the US school, I've also heard that a big problem with the public school is that depending on the neighborhood, and I've heard that hits people of color usually the most, the funding of the schools depending on the, like that there are many underfunded schools depending on the district or area.
Yes. And that's why it's problematic that the school grade is in property listings, because it takes away, you might have a school of great teachers that's just underfunded, and if you could get more folks in the neighborhood, it would raise those numbers up, they would get the money.
Although
um,
in
but
theory, in theory, you would think that it would work. This the grades are bad. Oh, so we need to address the problem by funding it more to raise the grades.
right, but that's logic, and that does not apply in K through 12 public education in this country. Let me be clear, we don't. So everything, so people, psychometricians, people in
Field.
my world, especially at the state and federal level, we all know what's going on because we've looked at the data. It's racism, okay, and classism, because I want to be very, very clear
Oh,
here.
they
As
intersect
much,
usually.
they absolutely do. And poor white kids are really in big trouble as well in this country, but in a different, equal but different way as Black students are.
Right,
And then you've
because
got,
they have the additional layer of
yes,
racism.
and then you have the two things that white people don't want to talk about: the radically different slopes of growth for uh, English as a second language students that are immigrants and specifically are from South America and Central America. Huge, huge, huge growth trajectories. Okay, they outpace white students rather quickly. By about fourth grade, any students, and you can do it grade by grade as well, you can look and see that the growth trajectories are just much faster. And then we also never talk about the white Asian learning gap, right? Because that's always there as well. We also then have to take a step back and say, why on earth are we doing this? We know that race is a social construct, so why are we even doing this?
Yeah,
And we're not doing anything about it except for putting band-aids on.
right.
So affirmative action, frankly, is a band-aid. A lot of the things that we have are band-aids to make things
So
seem better, to make ourselves feel better. Hey, we're addressing this problem, we're giving people chances. No, we're not. We're just,
it actually raises a few questions on my end. Does
it's,
that
yeah, it's
does that mean, because
mhm.
since it's a band-aid and the main topic is should we get rid of it or not? Is it a band-aid that we need as we actually address the problems, or is it a band-aid that we should do away with? Or
I think,
I felt that it was a band-aid that we should probably keep as we
yes,
address the
I think that we
problem.
should keep it. I think anything that, first of all, keeps our eyes open toward the fact that we even need to have the conversation, that's good. Because if you get rid of affirmative action and then that conversation is no longer the topic, that's even worse.
Right.
Sweeping it under the rug is not the answer. But to fix these issues of the black white achievement gap, okay, that we're going to have to look and say, okay, we need to be giving more resources to certain schools. We also need to look at what we're evaluating and what we're using student test scores for, to
Right.
be very specific.
So it's a
Stop
useful
using
it's
them
so
to
it's a use
evaluate teachers.
right. So it's a useful tool, the
Yes.
affirmative action. I have another question, might sound like a silly question. What scenarios do we what are all of the scenarios in which affirmative action comes into play? Like, I know of a scenario where you have two equal candidates with equal scoring, equal everything, and one person is a person of color and one isn't, and the person of color is chosen. Is that a scenario that happens?
Um, so it can happen, and there have been multiple lawsuits with. So when it comes to college admissions, that one's a little bit different than looking at affirmative action when it comes to hiring.
Mm-hmm.
for a job. So both are important, but they're approached a little bit
Right.
differently, and the arguments about them are
So,
different and often misunderstood.
college
Okay, so
speaking, what are the scenarios that sort of come in play? Because I know that
for
there used to be in Poland there used to be actually an affirmative action program in the times of communism. There used to be a form of affirmative action for university where students who came from farm backgrounds, farmland backgrounds, and such, just there was a section of points for what background you came from. So let's say you were a farmer's son, so you had plus 15 points for being a farmer's son.
okay, so it's not as explicit here. However, there are some very big caveats. Number one, private schools, private colleges can do whatever they want with broadly speaking, and they can make choices about how they want to or want to not go forward with any sort of affirmative action. Let me also be clear about this. Filling a quota is not healthy affirmative action.
Right.
Making sure that all of the students of all of the backgrounds that you want to include into your population on a campus, that is affirmative action. So where are you advertising? Are you making it cost effective for students that might not have the money or the background, right? So it's not just letting people in, and also it's not about letting people in at the expense of some poor white person. Okay, so that's what the mindset of
Right.
white Americans are largely. I know I don't
Yeah.
speak for all of us,
I
but that's
mean,
what
I've
it is.
heard it a lot of times in debates and discussions.
Yeah, if I let them in, then they're taking my no. That's not how it works.
Right.
But
Can you
that's the
walk us through
easiest
a case
argument
of can you walk us through a case step by step?
of
Affirmative action sort of happening.
So I know, and this is somewhat anecdotal, but I know that the facts can be verified. So Harvard um, decided that they were not going to give scholarships based on academic performance anymore. Okay, just let that sink in for a second. That they were going to rather give um, scholarships based on economic need.
Okay.
Okay, so now let me give you a problem or an example that I was there for that was problematic. And when I say I was there for, I worked at the high school where the student went. So this student, in her senior year, developed an algorithm for cancer treatments to essentially comb through data and say, here are the characteristics of your cancer, here are the characteristics of these treatments,
A student
and to come
developed
up
it.
with a student, a high school student, okay, developed this. Now, there were some people that they were working with at, I got to think of the directionality of this because it involves Stanford and Harvard. And so she started doing the work with a Harvard professor. Okay, so she's in high school, not accepted to any college, working with this professor, wants to go to Harvard, but her parents have money. She is, her family, she's not white, but she is South Asian. Okay, that does play into this. So she's not white, but her parents have some money. This girl invented this awesome way of looking at cancer treatments, which
But
is being used in China and other
don't
countries. Okay,
don't people like that
Harvard wouldn't accept
usually
her.
don't people like
Wouldn't
that
accept
usually
her.
just get automatic placement in a
Oh, they
university?
would not give her the money just because her parents made X amount. She said, "Well, that's their. I don't have that money, and like I have siblings. They're taking care of other family members. Like it's not your business, first of all." But Harvard said, "No, we're not going to give you a scholarship for this." So she went to Stanford, even though had published work. Harvard was making money from her. And that study.
Is so is that an example of
And so,
affirmative action?
yes, because they said we're not going to, they like Harvard kind of went too far. And so instead of saying we're going to take a robust look at the students we have coming in and try to base our acceptance criteria on your contributions to the academic community, your academic track record, your financial situation, your background. They were just like, no, we're really only going to try to pay for minorities that are poor, which
Right.
on the surface, I mean, it's just like, well, that sounds great, except for at the expense of what? So when you have
Hmm.
ill-formed applications of
Okay.
that, that's where people, and then people hang on to those examples.
So can you
Or if you are filling quotas, which is what the University of Michigan was accused of
right?
doing, right? That's what led to that. So they were just filling quotas. And at that point, when you have a highly competitive school and there are only a certain number of spots for each incoming freshman year, that's where that lawsuit came from. Are you just filling quotas? So if you're only filling quotas, that's not great. If you have a robust affirmative action program that's looking at outreach and also supporting those students when they come onto campus, because you think
Right.
about
Uh,
the lack of support,
I
whether it's
know
just,
it might be a
you know,
silly little thing, but I've actually talked to my mother about this topic today. She told me about the old affirmative action. She's not an expert by any means, but she said from as a regular unrelated person that from her perspective, the allowing a person that will not sort of be able to keep up, even if the person had like a bad circumstance due to them being marginalized, if the person just gets accepted and won't be able to keep up with the program, then that's just a waste. So she said that in her mind it should be this plus additional schooling for X amount of time to allow them to level with the program.
absolutely. And so I don't have a lot of examples of where the state of Texas and the University of Texas do the right thing, but I do in this case, shockingly. So I was the psychometrician at the University of Texas. So I dealt with all the incoming test scores and did a lot of analysis looking at what's working. And I'll be very clear. Part of my mission was to determine how to support students because there's a law in Texas that says that the top 10% of any graduating class, okay, and this is by school, gets automatic acceptance to Texas, like the state of Texas schools. So the University of
Automatic,
Texas.
as in no matter how low the score in the exam is?
Yeah, so there are lots of caveats now because at first, yes, and then what a mess that turned out to be for literally all the reasons. But let me give you some specific examples as to why
Okay.
they don't do that now.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got Texas is huge, and you have school districts like where I live in Austin, where it's a very large district where 10% of a class of 700 is very different than 10% of a class of 7. So when you think about just letting the top 10% in, there is a huge variance between those students, lots of variation between those students. You have very small school districts that can't even afford an AP curriculum. Okay, so they might be so smart, but they've never had the rigor. Their school didn't have the teachers who knew how to teach AP because that's
Right.
a separate license and qualification altogether. They might not have had those things. So Texas realized because they are cheap at the end of the day. So this was money related, but it did end up having a good outcome. So
Okay.
students were spending a lot of money on remedial courses. Those students tended to be the students that were from smaller towns that were overwhelmed by the overall University of Texas experience. It's in Austin. It's fun here. There are 50,000 undergraduate students, meaning that your chemistry class it could be larger than your town. So from a mental shift perspective, they need support. They also need support in their courses. So UT was doing a pretty good job of supporting the kind of shock from going from a small town into a college space, and they did that in two ways. One, they could route students to other UT campuses that were smaller, for example, UT San Antonio, UT El Paso, UT Brownsville, right? So smaller satellite campuses. That was one way. And the other way was that they did actually have on campus support for these students. They had well funded programs that would support these students. But they realized that the lack of rigor for some of their courses, plus that socio-emotional stress,
Yeah.
was too much. So they built these courses called On-Ramp. And it was an online hybrid course, so you could enroll in your school, and they were UT courses. You could get University of Texas credit, and it was dual credit for high school and college. And we built them to kind of replicate, but be an on-ramp to the AP curriculum. And we did it in math, English, and computer science. The computer science one is outstanding. They did a fabulous job. Math and ELA, but the computer science one, 10 out of 10. Outstanding. They're still doing it. So those types of things, not hard to build, not a heavy lift, especially at a university level. And the faculty really liked being involved and being able to work with those students before they could come in. It allowed the students to have a more informed opinion on the choices they were making for where they wanted to go to school, and they were getting the support that they needed. So UT actually did a great job when it came to that, and also just overall capping tuition costs. And then they 2 years ago made another law capping totally the cost based on parental income, which is great. So sometimes we do things really great here.
Right.
The majority of the time we do not, but this was one case.
So basically, this was less a case of, maybe I would use the term, less of affirmative action and more of an affirmative system.
Yes, absolutely. Because and you asked a question, and I saw your eyebrows raised when I said 10% of all graduating students with no other qualifications. So
right.
At first, yes. So then the College of Engineering was the first college to raise its hand within the university.
That might be a weird question. What if there's does affirmative action apply to people who are from like poor neighborhoods, very bad educational like what's the word?
Low SES?
Well, very low educational opportunities, I'd say. Like, because the school was so underfunded, everything was extremely bad. But
not as much as it should. I think I understand. So no, not as much as it should. It goes back to it being a band-aid, right? So people were focused on racial quotas, and it's easier to talk about race because, first of all, we can make it somebody else's problem. White people can be like, oh, that is such a problem in your community, so we can make that somebody else's problem. But when you start bringing in the intersectionality between socioeconomic status and race, it's harder to deny that that's a society problem. And rather than change society and give everybody a more level foundation to start their life journey upon, we're just throwing fixes at it. So you can do affirmative action without, you can do it just through assessment, which I've had to go and argue against in legislation before, to say, no, we can't weight people's test scores based on their background. Now, if you want to come up with a composite score for how you admit students, that's your business. But I will not weight the scores that you have, even though I could make an argument both ways. But the items themselves are still biased. Assessments are still based on the white man. And if you're talking about test scores to get into school, if you're talking about the neighborhood where you went to school, all of that comes back to test scores that are being completely misused. So consequential validity out the window. I can measure really well how well you understand math, how well
Right.
you understand the concepts of math at the level you're supposed to be at. What I can't do, and what they are doing, is evaluating teachers based on those
Yes,
test
yes,
scores,
yes,
which
yes,
how
yes.
ridiculous is that? But also the value added model that they have to meet for something called annual yearly progress to not be taken over by the state and then the Fed. It's bullshit. The math, the statistics behind it, incredibly problematic. The measures that they're putting into it, incredibly problematic. And then you had COVID. You had 2 years of broken test data, and they are
Right.
still going to act like everything's fine, and that the growth trajectory hasn't been broken, which is insane to me. It clearly has been, and so it puts into question so many other things. But all decisions are made because people want to sort numbers. So test scores, they use them for everything. They use it to defund schools. So in Houston, the governor's office wants more control over Houston because he's not able to control Houston, and that makes him really mad. Even though their schools have an B rating, the state took over the Houston school district. Just like they limited their ability to vote, now they're limiting their ability to be in control of what's happening in their schools, which were doing great, especially in Texas. They were hitting their growth targets, they were
Right.
serving minority populations. Most of Houston schools are fully bilingual. Can't say that about the rest of the state, so I don't know. I got on a tangent there. I'm sorry.
Right. No, 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 no. It can become, it feels like it can become a sort of like a, well, a spiral of death for schools,
Yes.
districts. Scores are poor, so it gets less money, so the scores get poorer, so it gets even less money.
Yes. And let me add a little tidbit in there for you. So when you look at school shootings, okay, and
Right?
why isn't anyone doing anything about school shootings?
Is it because of the test scores as well? Don't tell me it's
Not,
because
I
of that.
mean, kind of. It's more that so education is the one thing that we know can change your lot in life.
Yeah,
Whether you grew up in China, whether you grew up in Poland, whether you grew up here, education and having a shot is really a surefire thing to
right,
get you at least the ability to reason through in life where you want to go next.
right.
If you take that away, you have uninformed people that are just going to vote like sheep. This is what
Yeah,
is the goal. This is why we're banning books. So I think what's not talked about though is that they the powers that be, I'm gonna be just broad about that, but the folks that are banning books and stuff and not protecting kids and allowing school shootings, that is, in my opinion, very much on purpose, so that parents will be afraid. They will pull their kids out of school, and it will go towards homeschooling,
oh my
and
god,
or
the
private schools.
homeschooling is
I
a
know,
nightmare fueled
I
thing,
know,
right?
and so they want parents to be afraid to send their kids to school. So they want them to be pulled out and do homeschooling in private school, so that they cannot be indoctrinated by the left. This is the goal.
The private school thing
I
also seems pretty wild to me because I'm pretty sure in Poland, even though a school is private, it's still supposed to follow a certain curriculum. You know, a certain program. It cannot just, for example, decide, well, in this private school, we're not teaching biology, we're teaching creationism, for example. It's not accepted because, you know, you everybody needs to have like a valid degree. So even the private schools have to follow a program that gives you a valid degree.
Exactly. And so here, you can get around that by limiting the amount of federal or state funding that you take. For example, Hillsdale College, I don't know if you're familiar with that
No.
monstrosity of a college. I may or may not have graduated from there from undergrad. I don't want to talk about it. I don't ascribe to those views, but I did learn all their camp songs. It is a very right leaning school. When I went there, it was not religious, but in the 20 years since I've graduated, it's become rather tied in to
The
the religious
religion,
right.
right?
Um, they accepted no federal funding, none, zero. So Hillsdale College and Grove City, I believe, are the only two in the United States that accept no federal funding, which meant that I could smoke cigarettes in the student union and they sold them there, which was fun, right? In the
What?
90s. Yeah, you could. They sold cigarettes. You could smoke them in the student unions, and after 5, you could smoke cigarettes in the classrooms. Okay. They also did not have to teach anything they did not want to. They did not have to meet any sort of acceptance criteria with respect to affirmative action. They did not have to teach anything that they did not want to do, and they could teach whatever they did want to do
So how did
because
that
they took no
translate
federal
into an
funding.
actual valid diploma?
So they're still accredited. Okay, so they still have accreditation and they still had fantastic faculty there. They had brilliant faculty. Okay, so it was a little brainwashy, but still a valid degree in my opinion, although I wouldn't go there again. I'm glad I went
What if they
for a
can
lot of reasons, but
teach
go ahead.
whatever they want?
Well, so they're still really excited about the classical liberal, like we're going to read the classics. So they still do care about education and philosophy and history and all of that. So they did a good job providing.
Okay.
That's not the issue, and they would have lost their accreditation. Okay,
Yeah.
the difference is so they are accredited, but they don't have to. For example, Title IX stuff did not apply. They also don't accept the GI Bill. So if you served in the military and wanted to use your voucher essentially for free college because you served the military, you
Okay.
can't use it at Hillsdale because
Oh.
they accept no federal funding. So there can be no oversight of certain things there. Now, is it probably problematic these days? Yeah, because the majority of their students are homeschooled kids that are being funneled directly from their homeschool right into the Republican Party. And I was there. I could vouch for that type of thing. So I know why they're doing this. When I see that no one's doing any sort of anything about school shootings, I see the fear that they're building because this was what I think I've always known, and also why I walked away from that
Yeah.
world. Because my original degree is, I mean, there's not much I couldn't tell you about Austrian economics because I have a double major in math and economics from Hillsdale
Okay.
with minors in philosophy and German, just
Oh.
because. And then I went on to get my PhD in education at a state school, a public university. So glad that I did that. It definitely confirmed a lot of the bad feelings that I had. But
Wait, but you're in the U.S.?
yes,
Okay. In U.S., even public universities are paid. Yes.
yes.
Okay. Because when I hear public, I hear free. So.
No, only California and only for California residents. Um, Now I did have an assistantship, so mine was paid for because of the research and teaching that I did. So, it was not free. I did labor in exchange. However, I loved every minute of my graduate school, so I have zero complaints about that. But I also paid for 5 years of a private undergrad education, only to find out that it was like largely right wing horseshit that I was being
Oh.
fed for 5 years.
Right. So,
But
it sort of all of it brings me to sort of like a question. Um. how does affirmative action work between multiple candidates of color?
So that's when you are, so if that conversation happens in some sort of an admissions conversation, that first of all, that tells me that you're looking at quotas and filling a quota versus trying to ensure that you have
Right,
the diversity that you need.
right,
So in my opinion, I don't know how realistic that actual argument is, because I've also worked in the admissions
right.
department for a university.
I honestly don't know either. I'm just honestly
No,
asking.
I understand the question though. I do understand the question. And I understand that people will ask that question and probably argue both sides, but I don't think it's all right. So if we're I can't say what any school would do, because there probably is a rubric. Every school is going to have a rubric for how they are making decisions that are outside of affirmative action. I think so from my perspective, when I worked in admissions, it's different, admittedly, for graduate school than for undergrad, but there are issues in both. Um, I still think that at the end of the day, most of the faculty making the decisions just want there to be thoughtful and engaged students. That's their main concern. Is,
Right,
will I have thoughtful and engaged students? And is there diversity? Because if you don't have diversity, it's boring. Trust me. 5 years at Hillsdale, all
right.
white kids. There were maybe 8 black people. I was one of 2 Jews. I was called TJ. I
Oh,
was called the token Jew there.
oh my
That was great.
gosh.
Oh yeah, they called me TJ. It was awesome. I probably should have left, but I digress.
Okay,
So
okay.
you want diversity. You need that, and I think most academic institutions understand that, but that's not always true. And when it comes down to the money, so there's always a money aspect here, right? So are they getting federal funding for having more of a certain group of people, whether it's based on their ethnicity, race, or socioeconomic status? Are you getting money for that as the university? Maybe. Are you um, making decisions that are, not great for the university because you're trying to look a certain way, but you're not bringing in the right students? And by that I mean students who are going to be engaged in your content
Right.
and be there to learn. I will also note, what schools don't have these problems? What colleges don't have affirmative action issues?
Yeah.
Historically black colleges and universities in this country. And you know what they accept? Everyone. You can be white, you can be green, you can be any color of the
Right.
rainbow, you can be anywhere on any sort of gender spectrum,
Right.
and they're going to bring you in and be like, you came here, we assume you would like to learn, welcome
Mm-hmm.
in. So it's interesting to me that HBCUs, as we call them here, don't have that issue.
Right.
Interesting, isn't it? It's weird.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But usually, hmm.
It's not. I'm being sarcastic. It's not weird. It makes complete sense,
I
because
mean,
white people are the people that like to restrict access to things,
right.
and then make something like affirmative action to be like, no, see, we're not restricting.
Because I know
Look
that
at how we're doing that.
in Poland there is usually a limited amount of places each year for candidates for university. Does that play into it as well?
Yes and no. There are so many colleges and universities in this country. There are thousands,
Right. Yeah.
thousands. So unless you have had your heart set on a specific university
Yeah.
for your whole
Mm-hmm.
life,
Yeah.
it's rare. I applied to only 3 colleges in undergrad, or when I went to undergrad. I only applied to 3, and I got into all 3. Now, granted, again, this was the late 1990s, and so there was some affirmative action that was helping women get into college, but my GPA was not that great. I don't know
Okay.
why I got
Because
in, but
I'm sort of
um,
I'm sort of used to conversations such as uh, like, oh, for this sort of for the thing that I want to study. When I did the exam, there were 15 candidates for one spot, or something along
Some,
those lines.
sometimes, but so that's pretty rare in undergrad. I can see that more at a graduate level, but that's really pretty rare in undergrad. And for places like
Because
that, people get really excited about that. You're talking about potentially like an Ivy League school or a family legacy school. And frankly, if you have a family legacy at an Ivy League, you're going to get in. If you have money and a family legacy at Harvard, you're getting in. Same with Princeton, Yale, Stanford, Northwestern, all of them. That's
right,
how it is. Um, Even at some state schools, like some
right,
prestigious or public schools. So the University of Michigan is a public university, highly prestigious. They have a lower threshold of acceptance than Michigan State does, but you're still you can. I mean, you could probably wait a year to get in, or you could go to school
right.
someplace else and then go back in a year. So
Well, that is what
acting
people
like,
do. That is what people do even in Poland.
but it's
Like they
not because
do.
they let a minority in. Okay, that's,
Well, in
I'm
Poland,
sorry.
that's much like in Poland usually is that oh I didn't manage to get in, so I'll just study here for a bit and maybe I'll just transfer or something. That is what happens.
Sure. There are so many colleges and
But
universities here.
when
And
I
so that to me, that argument just doesn't hold
so
water for
you
me
yeah
because
you've mentioned the argument of oh uh, this person who was admitted through affirmative action took away the spot from Johnny. Let's call him Johnny. And in my mind, this paints the picture of oh, it was a tight competition with 50 people for one spot, and poor Johnny, who worked all of his life, lost this limited spot because Frank got in.
right. And so and that is a very common argument made. And so my question is, okay, Johnny, did you have the highest grades of all the people? Is that like where did you fall in all of the rankings? Because what were all the reasons that you were not accepted to this? Also, did you apply anywhere else? Did you make this an intentionally narrow decision so that you could come back and make this argument about how people of
I
color
mean,
are stealing your
realistically
spot?
speaking, usually people apply to 2 or 3 places at least. By
The scarcity mindset of white people, okay? It's a scarcity mindset. And I think there's also a perception that, oh my gosh, if we let people of color have the same right, they are going to do to us what we did to them, not understanding that literally no one else except for white people thinks that way. So
right, yeah, it's a
it
really
pains
strange.
me. It pains me.
That is a really strange because it basically, well, it just keeps the status quo basically. Is what it is.
Absolutely. And that's why it's a band-aid. And the conversation around the application of affirmative action and the variation from state to state and from private and state schools, and then the other misconceptions and confusion when it comes to hiring. Okay, so when it comes to hiring an affirmative action,
Yeah.
I worked for one of the University of California schools. I was at one of the UC schools, and I was a hiring manager.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually executive leadership, and so I hired people at all levels, and so I know the rules around affirmative action law and hiring, especially in California, which has the most strict. And let me tell you, it is very specifically not about a quota. I I blew the whistle where I used to work
Right.
because of racism in two different categories. One was their response to what I wanted to talk about with respect to measurement, and the other one was when one of my psychometricians resigned. I
Mm-hmm.
was told by my boss this would be a really great time for a diversity hire. And I looked at him and I said, that's illegal. What you just said to me is illegal. Number one, that's
Right.
number one. Number two, that's not how diversity hiring works. And number three, have you taken a look at my team? Because my team is the only team that's not all white women, because
Right.
it was just education's dominated by women. So the point there is that a lot of people don't understand fundamentally what affirmative action is. So
Right.
affirmative action in hiring is about the wording. So are you using language that is open and welcoming to people, that there are not little microaggressions within your descriptions of things, that you're not using language that would turn certain people away?
Right.
Are
Yeah.
you advertising it in a place where, so did you post it on diversityhire.com? I mean, it's not hard. There is a list of stuff that you follow, but very specifically what I can't do,
So accessibility, right?
is hire somebody. If I have two people, okay, if I have two people for a job, and
Right.
one is a white man and one is a woman of color,
Yeah.
I can't hire her to and say out loud, I wanted a diversity hire.
Right.
That's against the law. I can lose my job, and now that person that didn't get the job, if they found out, can sue the University of
Yeah.
California and me. So I still, at the end of the day, I'm going to pick the most appropriate candidate.
Right.
But did I do my due diligence to make sure that everybody in the diversity cloud who's appropriate for that role, which is also another issue, not a lot of people that are psychometricians, most of them are white and Asian men. So not a lot of ability to bring in diversity anyway.
Right.
But
So,
that's illegal. You cannot say, I'm hiring this person because we need more diversity. You can't say that either. You can't tokenize people. You can't tokenize people. That's
right.
just as bad,
Yeah.
if not worse. So it's misunderstood, it's misapplied, and it's the scarcity mindset of white men in this country who are only thinking, if we give everyone else an equal shot, it's going to take away from me. And it's not. It's not a zero sum game. It's also just kind of like, natural rights, not it's not actually scarce. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's people in charge who are limiting those natural rights. But
Yeah.
natural rights themselves, not scarce. Not scarce. We should
Yeah.
not have to be making these decisions. Somebody did a long time before us. And that is why, in my opinion, affirmative action is a band-aid. It's not a bad band-aid. It's still helping. But are we uniformly applying it? Are we looking at the studies to say, is it helping? And are we stepping in where it is being misused? Probably not, unfortunately,
Right.
in my opinion.
So going back to the schooling, the schooling topic, I'm to understood that most of the time it is not a matter of people fighting for a limited number of spaces of applicants available.
So that's going to depend on. So it does depend on your field. So things like engineering, STEM, things like that are going to be more competitive.
Maybe let's take this one step at a time.
Mm-hmm.
How often in the US does it happen that there's plenty of spaces, like amazing amount of free spaces at a faculty or the thing they want to study, but people of color are being just rejected on prejudice grounds?
I don't have those statistics, and I think that they'd be. I suspect that you could probably get some. It might be anecdotal though, because I don't know how you would measure that.
Right. But does it? Would you say that it happens, or would you say that it doesn't happen when there is a? We're assuming there are tons of free spots for people to just apply and get in.
So, okay, so there's a couple different scenarios here. So let's break them into groups.
Yeah.
So one is large tier 1 universities. So we're talking about universities that have over 10,000, let's say over 20,000 students, okay? Over 20,000 undergraduate students on campus per year.
Okay.
That application process for undergrads is all done without any humans being involved for the most part.
Wait,
Okay,
how
so
is that
so
possible?
you're filtered out. You're going to be filtered out based on your GPA and your test scores. Now, this is getting interesting with some states doing away with the SAT and the ACT, like California did. But you're filtered out of the whole situation, step one, based on your GPA and um, your test scores. So if you meet that threshold, okay, now you're into a slightly smaller group of people, but it's still a massive amount of students that are being accepted and denied. Massive amounts, tens of thousands, right? Especially at a school like the University of Texas, Michigan State, Notre Dame, even if we want to throw some private ones in there, right? Those are tier one research universities that are going to have huge amounts. And it is required for a university to post their acceptance rate. So before you spend the money, you can look and see what their acceptance rate is. You know, it's out there. That is on everybody's website. So you know
Yeah.
what your chances are. So
Yeah.
does it happen? Sure. I mean, not everybody can go everywhere all the time. That's just the
Okay,
nature of
but
things.
when you
So,
just
mhm.
so I understand this system completely, when you say ACTs and the other thing, is that
SAT.
a is that an accumulative score, or is this a score from a single important exam that people take?
So the ACT or the SAT, those are standardized tests that you take in grade 11 generally.
Okay.
Um, and then those are used in addition to your cumulative GPA from high school.
So there's
Um,
a
and they are biased as well. They're highly correlated with socioeconomic status, highly correlated. So the ACT, from a psychometric standpoint, is a disaster. The SAT used to be great. They've made changes that I don't agree with, but moreover, the SAT is very good at predicting one thing and one thing only. It has nothing to do with your intelligence. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with your likelihood to persist and re-enroll your sophomore year. That's
right.
it.
So
And it's incredibly good at doing that.
I
But
can
again,
give you a
highly
comparison.
correlated.
I can give you a
Mm-hmm.
comparison of how it works in Poland, basically, university when it comes to what determines who goes to what university, basically. It used to be that you would just go out of high school and each university would basically have its own exam. And if you pass the exam, you got in. That was a pretty simple system. Now you have the so called Matura exam at the end of high school. You
Mm-hmm.
choose the exact, you choose which universities you would like to apply to. And
Mm-hmm.
then at the end of high school, you choose the exams, the finish, the final exam in high school, you choose the specific subjects that you want to do. And the scores in those subjects are basically what allow you to entry into a university. That is basically how it works in Poland. And
So,
the universities have
yeah.
their criteria. You have to have 85 in math plus 75 in other subject. And usually people apply to free universities if they don't have high enough exam thing to get to the first choice, they get to the second or third choice. That's basically how it works. So how would you?
It's similar to some degree. So, uh, you you where you decide to go for undergrad is largely dependent upon, so first of all, private or public. So if you're going to go to a state school, for example, what state are you in, and do you want to go to any schools in your state because it's going to be cheaper? So
Yeah.
that's step one. um, and then, so the SAT and the ACT are norm referenced tests, meaning that it's not a 75% type of a thing. You have a scale score, right? Out of like 1,200. I don't even remember what their scale is anymore. And so not only are you looking at what you're competing against, the average scale score and standard deviation of everybody else that applied that year. So it's not as set in stone, but there's a pretty good range, and it tends to be fairly stable. So if you don't really know what you want to be when you grow up, once you are done with high school,
Yeah.
you apply to a general degree within a college that you want to go to. Now, so here in the United States, people, there again, lots of variety. You can pick because that's where your parents went. That's the sports team that you like.
Right.
That's a big way of deciding, right?
It's already a
Um,
huge difference, by the way. In Poland, you're usually expected to, after high school, you're basically 18-ish, to select a specialized university thing.
so in the US, that's where you're going to get more of the limited spots. So if I know that I want to go to law school
Yeah.
and I want to go to Harvard Law, I'm going to look up and find out where does Harvard Law School accept the most amount of applicants from. Where I'm going to look at an undergrad that's going to give me the best chance of getting into the next school that I want to go to. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I went to Hillsdale and I started out as a political science major. I made it through one semester and immediately changed my mind to math and economics. Um, no hate, but the
So you
professor that I had there was just, it was not for me.
so you
So
went
I
through
didn't know what I.
the one semester of President Sunday route and decided that's not your.
That's right. And then I decided that that was not for me. Although um, the way that Hillsdale taught economics, arguably, I kind of did get a lot of that. Plus, my philosophy minor helped along the way as well. But so I did not know what I wanted to do. So I just went to college at a school that at the time I chose because it was close to family and because it was small and I was a bad kid. Like I like to have a lot of fun and not always make the best choices. So I wanted to go to a small school where I would have less of a chance of kind of just going off the rails once I was out of my parents' house, right? So that for me, that's what I did. But then for graduate school, I went to a giant state school. It was great. So if you know what you want to do, that might drive you toward a more focused set of schools that may or may not be more difficult to get into.
Yeah. So how does affirmative action work in those conditions?
It is so different based on the state, the institution itself. And
Like if we
so,
would have Harvard Law, for example, the one example that we had in the first example that we've sort of had, how would it go there?
well, I don't know about their, so law school is different. So graduate school admissions and affirmative action are a little bit of a different story than undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just because you have so many, there's a lot fewer people to sort through that have the credentials to get into a, a JD program or a PhD or a master's program. So it's different. It still comes into factor there. But so Harvard decided that they were not going to give academic scholarships anymore. They were only giving
Oh,
socioeconomic status scholarships. Okay, so we're not. Harvard said to the world, "I don't care how smart you are. If you want to go here, you better be poor. Otherwise, you're paying full price for it. I don't care what color you are, and I do not care how smart you are.
usually
If you
Poland
are
you
not
get
poor."
you actually usually get scholarships and the like based on your grades, your performance, and
And certainly that can't, so you could, yes, okay, and then there, so you can get scholarships from the institution that you're in. You can also get private scholarships where you have an application process, and you might have to write something, do some sort of community service. So there's multiple ways to get funded
mm-hmm.
to go to school here, but largely it's through student loans or your parents paying
Right.
for it.
Of course, keep in mind the thing that I've described with the high school, and to answer what chatter, there's the final high school exam works as the university admission exam, de facto. But what I described was the public universities, which once you go through that process and get admitted, you study for free. you know. And in with private universities in Poland, it's basically you pay and you get in. Yeah, the
So
admission process is basically you pay and you get in.
yes,
Usually
that happens here as well.
there's not really like a, oh, unfortunately there's no spots. There's usually spots as long as you
Oh,
just pay.
same here.
Yeah.
That is true, private and public here. Okay, so if you want your kid who might not be very bright, but you have a lot of money to get into a school, donate a wing. Donate a wing for a science building. Donate to the library. Build them a gym.
Well,
Build them better sports ball
Poland has
facilities.
the nice thing that it's, well, it still was enough for me to drop out at one point in the past, but it's relatively a fraction of what you have to pay in the US, which is why there are many students from all sorts of places around the globe that come to Poland to study medicine because it's just cheap to
Right?
pay to pay to study medicine. So we have people from all over the globe. You like from people from England come to study like medicine in Poland. People from Afghanistan, Iran, um, India, from all over the world, just come and study because it's just cheap, which creates
It's not cheap here.
which ironically creates like a very diverse environment in the medical university space in Poland.
People, the United States had its own issues with graduate school because it is more affordable in some ways to attend graduate school in the United States. Easier to get funding, easier to get an assistantship. The caveat being how, can you pass the test of foreign language, like the TOEFL or whatever? That's the biggest hurdle. If you can pass that, you could probably get into graduate school. And that was really true for a long time, especially in the quantitative side of things. So at Michigan State, I was the only student from the US in my program in the United States. I was the diversity there. Um, and it was
As a
largely
Jewish
because,
person,
as a
or
white Jewish person, as the only person from the United States there, so everyone was from China,
okay,
two people from Korea, and a couple people from Southeast Asia. So China
so Vietnam or
had this super fun thing that they did. This is more standardized test T. So China was like, hey, when the SAT went computer based and all the tests did, they're like, we can't. We still have to do it on paper because our keyboard is so different. It's just not going to work. And so everyone was like, yeah, okay, that checks out. So the entire country of China got 10 different versions of the SAT, and they would memorize. They had testing centers where they would help tutor the students, and they would just memorize every vocabulary word that was on the vocab section, every question on all 10
yeah,
forms.
that is a
So
big.
this was the GRE. Sorry, so this was for grad school. So then you've got people like me that just took the GRE, which I'm not dumb, but I'm also not ironically great at standardized testing, even though that's what I do now. So I didn't get as much funding as other people did because they cheated on the GRE to get in there. Um, so, but that kind of worked itself out, honestly, on its own because in graduate school, if you can't write and communicate well, you're not going to get through graduate school because you kind of have to write a book about what you're doing. So the folks
Like
that cheated on the GRE
like the fight
took
the
themselves
graduate
out.
paper, right?
Yeah, yeah. My dissertation, it is a book. It's a short
Yeah,
book, but it is a
and they
book.
get published from what I, yeah.
Yes.
Um, we got a question about affirmative action from the audience. If you're ready to receive a question.
Sure.
Hey, Lucy and Pearl, what are circumstances that has extremely high competition GPA wise in Canada? Ontario medical schools is super competitive. How does affirmative action work in a case like that?
So I can't speak to the implementation of Canadian laws, but let's talk about the University of Michigan Medical School, because
Okay.
and as much as I hate talking about them in a good way because I went to Michigan State and they're our rivals, I will because they are a good institution. So the University of Michigan is highly competitive. There's a reason that they were in the affirmative action Supreme Court case, because they were the ones that were brought to the forefront about, are you taking away my ability? Oh, it was a white girl who sued, right?
Because
She
she
found
said
that her spot was taken.
her, yeah, okay. So how did
So,
that develop?
um, they were using quotas instead of doing a good faith affirmative action. They were filling quotas. It is competitive there, and it is money based. These schools are nonprofits, but that doesn't mean no profit. Okay, so they're gonna. I don't know what all decisions were being made there.
Mm-hmm.
And who can say why a lot of those things are being made? But
Right.
when you're looking at a highly competitive program, that's where you're going to get the most amount of. You have a
So
lot of very qualified people applying
yeah,
for a more limited number,
of
and at
space.
that
Yeah,
point, what do you base it on, and do you allow ethnicity, race,
to
gender
play
to
into.
factor in?
Yes. Yeah.
That is very much obscured from the public view how those decisions are being made, and I'm not even entirely sure
So
how
we don't
all of
know.
those things come down. No, it's and to get somebody who's going to say I know exactly how this worked, either they're lying or they are a whistleblower, or
So
like because they did it before. Because we don't know. I've sorted through the test scores. I've looked at the data for admissions for different universities, and it does come down to most of the time the GPA and the test score. But let me be clear, there's such a high correlation between test scores and socioeconomic status and race that it's a very blurry line.
yeah. So we don't know what the situation was in this case. What
I
the
don't exactly recall.
diversity we
I,
do we even know if it was affirmative action in taking place?
at the in the U of M one, I do think that they did have evidence of the. I think it was. Let's see.
Like that when that white girl sued, was it actually was it actually a person being uh an affirmative action?
Hold on, I'm reading really quickly. So it was the Bollinger one. Okay, a U.S. affirmative action admissions policy in a 6-3 decision announced on June 23rd, 2003. The Supreme Court ruled that the university's point system was too mechanistic and therefore unconstitutional. And so that's what I'm saying about it being quota based, right? So there is a rubric. Every university has a rubric. They probably have a public facing one and then like the reality based one. I also would suggest that it varies from year to year because you have a different group of people applying every year and things change, rankings change. All of those things factor in. This is a multifaceted situation here. So, what are the rubrics that schools are using? Are they using race to meet a quota and have an appearance of this diversity? Are they using affirmative action to make sure that everyone who should have access to this opportunity has
Does.
access to the opportunity.
Right.
That to me is the question, not should we have it or not. It's clear to me that we should. It's more of fixing the application of the affirmative action and supporting the underlying. And
Because,
I would make the same argument about assessment. We need it. It's helpful to understand how kids are doing on the stuff we want them to know, but is it the only thing that we should be looking at? No.
right. But, uh, that may be a pretty silly question on my part, but doesn't that sort of lead to a situation in which anytime a person of color gets admitted to university, people will say that it's a affirmative action being done?
Yes, and it did. It did. When affirmative action, when those laws were passed, I was in high school, middle school or high school. Okay, and this court case was I was in graduate school, so I remember this in Michigan. I was at Michigan State when this was all going down. That was absolutely what was being said. That was the argument, was that I'm that I'm going to lose out on a spot, or I'm going to lose this. It's a zero sum game here. This is not fair. They're going to choose black people over white people because that's what the law says. The law never has said that. So that is the argument that's made. They're going to choose this over this. That's never historically been true. That people choose minorities over white people. But I would like for somebody to show me where that is the case, where that happens, and it's not in an industry like farming. Okay, when is that happening? But does it happen? Sure. So every black student, and if you talk to a lot of Gen Xers that are black, men and women and anyone in between, are going to have the same experience where they're going to say, yes, I felt that students in my classes judged me and wondered that. One of my very good friends, I remember having conversations with him. He's a journalist. Maybe I should put you in contact with him because he would have a lot to say about this too.
Right, yeah.
So we've talked about it before, where he was constantly wondering, are there students looking at me in this class thinking that I took their friend's spot?
Right.
Are there people thinking, oh, he's just here because of affirmative action and not because he deserves to be here?
Right.
My whole thing, that's like the white supremacy mindset again. Why on earth do you believe that you deserve to be here? Especially if that's in lieu of somebody else. Like, I think the point is missed. Affirmative action was put into place because for the whole time we've been taking everybody else's.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Do. That's what we
That
do.
is that is why that is what I assume, that it's to sort of equalize a thing that was effectively an
Yes.
affirmative action in support of white people.
Yes.
Right.
And it's been hastily, as most policy is, right? So the policy itself lags and then its implementation is rushed. And then we all as humans have to spend the next 10 to 15 years figuring it out, which is what's happening here. So again, it's not perfect. Its existence is because it's trying to fix a whole bunch of other stuff. Some
long-term stuff.
Yes. It's not accountability though, right? So it's like it's still not taking accountability necessarily for what happened in the past. Like,
no.
Everything that we've done in our country, how it was built, founded, and laws have progressively been made to more and more refine what being a white person is, right? So that's what the government here does. We refine the definition of what it is to be white and then write our laws around that. So affirmative action is no different. This was to put a Band-Aid on a problem that definitely needed a Band-Aid, but now we might need to adjust that. Now we have KT tape, if we're going to take the bandage analogy, right? So now we don't need a cloth bandage that can stretch out. We have this like really cool bandage that has like other cool things we could do. So can we change it? Can we work with it? But also, can we have a conversation that doesn't delve into some sort of dichotomy situation where it's like, if I give to you, then I am losing. That's not what's happening.
Right.
And that argument is so hard for,
Hardwired.
yeah, it's built in, unfortunately.
So
It's
we're
sad,
talking
but
about
unfortunate.
expansion and building upon,
Support, right?
essentially.
So it's the same with research. When you publish something, like, one of the most powerful things when you're doing research is to get somebody to replicate that study. So it gives credence to the work that you did, but it also strengthens the whole field if that in itself was a good idea. Also, when you think about reliability, Cronbach's alpha, okay, he called it alpha with the assumption that people were going to come along and create beta, gamma, all the rest of them, but no one did. They
Yeah.
just stopped there. So the same thing has happened with affirmative action. We did it. We can check this box off, and now it becomes a dichotomy of, do we keep it or do we get rid of it? Or
Yeah.
instead of having a more robust conversation to say, is this helping? What ways is it working? What ways is it being abused slash harmful? And what are the supports that we can bring to prop this ideal up? Because the ideal would be to have the representation, because isn't that what we're going for? Is representation of what our world and our country looks like. At least I'm
Yeah.
hoping that's what I would like when I look at higher ed and I see the lack of any sort of diversity there. And then I think to myself, I fell into my field. A series of events had to happen for me to even know what psychometrics were. But
Yeah.
there are no people of color making decisions at my level because no one ever told any of those folks to go get a PhD in psychometrics.
Yeah.
So you can't make better laws about equity if you don't have people that are representing the different groups that we want to include in the decision making process, which then necessarily suggests that we need to keep affirmative action around,
Right. So, because
to me.
you speak of support systems, and to me, that's most interesting to the group that of people that would love to get a university degree that were sort of in a really hard spot for the most of their life because, well, we go back to history to the legacy of the redlining and many other things where the neighborhoods were not in a good place, and a person that is really eager to get an education but has not been always capable of being in a position to get the high score that you spoke of to actually get in. So do those sorts of people sort of also get a chance via affirmative action to get into a university?
Ideally, in my opinion, I think that they should. Is that
I
part
mean,
of the law? No,
yeah,
it's not. However, there is a stigma against community colleges, um, and technical colleges, and any sort of thing that could bridge between high school and a 4-year
right,
university. There's also a stigma around the name, the prestige of your university. So if we could knock that stigma back a little bit, that's also going to alleviate some of these
right,
problems, because there are a lot of people that can do amazing things from a community college perspective, whether
yeah,
it's attending there as a jumping off point, what maybe that's all that you need to get the
right,
certification or credentials to go into this world and do
right. Let's
amazing things
let's
and
even
give
go
back.
to an extreme example of a person that comes from a poor community. The school was pretty crappy, and they have a low score because apart from studying, they also had to work
Mm-hmm.
to help with with basic stuff to help the family to basically manage to stay afloat, which I probably that happens. I'm pretty sure.
Well, not only does it happen, but now you've got Arkansas that just changed their labor laws to allow even younger people to work overnight shifts
There
at
we go.
very dangerous meat processing places and factories. So yeah,
Yeah.
that is a real concern.
So
Absolutely.
this sort of person, do they like have a chance to be like, okay, I do have this low score, but my circumstances were sort of this, and this, and can
So
I get a
yes.
shot?
Now, is it written into the law? It again kind of depends on your state and the institution, but if you and this is again the issue because who's going to tell these kids that, but you can oftentimes use that story and use that background in your essay that you write to get accepted to college to get a lot of funding, but you have to do the work yourself. Your parents, your support system, whoever your chosen family, your actual whatever, the people in your life, you need them to be supportive of you. If you're coming from a disadvantaged place, to be able to succeed, it's possible. You can make money. So
Well, it's as, as sad as
you
it
got
is.
to know the laws.
What if your family is unsupportive? They say, if you go to university, how are you gonna help us keep staying afloat? You shouldn't go to university. You should just keep working.
Right.
So that probably happens.
I'm certain that it happens. All of these things, and now, and whether is that an affirmative action issue, I don't know. But
I mean, I would think it
the
sort of was that the university sort of should step in and say, this person deserves a chance to be able to, well, to get out of this situation.
I can't. I would now. That's interesting because I would love to see what would happen, especially depending on the state. Oh my god! I just imagine the
Like
university
I
being
would
sued by the parents.
I sort of think that this is like these sort of cases are the perfect cases for the support networks to exist and say, you had it rough till now, but now you know we offer you this extra courses, extra things for you to be able to get the things that you were not able to up to this point, since
I
you're showing
and
that you're super eager to.
technology is helping with that. So online, the ability to do things hybrid, and I like whether or not you should do an entire degree online. That's a separate conversation, but the ability to have a hybrid situation should help. It lowers the cost, it makes things more flexible, and it reduces the requirement for you to live on campus and maybe
Right.
step away
But
from
of
a
course,
family that you might be
there we
supporting.
enter the problems of having an access to a computer, internet, and
Yes,
so on and so
absolutely,
forth.
which is highly problematic as well. It was so I was in charge of the assessments when COVID happened, and I've got states that have laws that require them to test students. It is a state law, it is a federal law that you give summative year end assessments to kids in grades 3 through 8, sometimes through 11, depending on the state. So I had to. So, and I'm sitting there in my office thinking, do these people have any idea what they've just asked me to do? Because so I had 14 states and the Bureau of Indian Education. Okay. What Wi-Fi on on the reservation? What Wi-Fi?
Yeah,
What Wi-Fi are
exactly.
we
Yeah,
talking about? What laptops are we talking about?
yeah.
Because we stole their land. Do you think we gave them 5G? No. So we had there were states. I will give credit where credit is due. There were states that brought in special Wi-Fi connectors and things like that to poor neighborhoods. Not all states, but some did. There were some states that were amazing when it came to supporting kids during the pandemic and access to technology. And there were states that weren't. Their test scores, I'm sure, reflect that. Um,
Or
that
it's probably ended in a tangible lack of education as well.
well, that was my whole argument as to why they shouldn't use the scores to for the legal purposes of them. So by law, you have to have the end of year test so that they can feed it into the annual yearly progress algorithm to see if our school's meeting that. My argument was, yes, you should test these kids because you need to know where they're at. How
Right.
far behind are they? Where are they? And how, across districts within a state that will vary. So yes, you need it, but you shouldn't be using that to evaluate teachers or to punish schools or anything like that. It should just be like a snapshot. And I had to explain, look, I don't know. Your kids are going to score worse. That period. I'm sorry. On the
Right.
whole, at
Yeah.
the aggregate, they're going to score worse. But what I can't tell you why is I can't tell you why. Is it because they themselves got sick? Is it because somebody that they know got sick? Was it because of Black Lives Matter? Was it an intersection between any of those things? Did one of
Right.
their classmates pass
Wait,
away?
why Black Lives Matter?
Because that was overlapping with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter. So when George Floyd was murdered in this country, that
Yeah.
overlapped with the pandemic.
Yeah, there were
From an
protests,
education
yeah.
standpoint, I had to take all the items out of the assessment that related to a pandemic, large police action, right? I
Yeah.
can't traumatize kids when they're teaching them. So
Right.
all of
Yeah.
those things overlapped, and it was very traumatic to Black students, I would imagine, mostly, and then
Yeah.
also other students. So those two things happening at the same time all had the ability to impact student scores and
Yeah,
their.
absolutely. Yeah. The more
So
stressed you are, the worse you do. Yeah.
exactly. So in a normal situation, right? So let's say like the year's going along and there is an event. It's a short event, but there's an event. So let's say it's a school shooting within a state, a district. I know where to look for the differences, the variations in the data. I know what to and how big of a disparity there is because I historically know what their standard error is around their point estimate of the mean. How much variation around your mean is there? Because that's really what we care about in testing. It's that standard deviation. That is everything. So if I don't know the nature of that, because I can't tell you if it's COVID related, Black Lives Matter related, the just general politics in this country related, right? Everyone was fighting. We had anti vaxxers, we had racists, we had everything. Everything happened at once. And the
Everything,
pandemic,
everywhere, all at once, like the
all
movie.
of it. And you want me, yeah, right? And you want me to say why the kids aren't learning? I
Yeah.
can't do that. All I can say is it's likely that they won't do very well. Now, how do you fix it? How do you bring them back to where they should be? I don't know because I don't know what combination of what is happening in this world right now contributed to this.
Right.
This is also one of the main reasons that I walked away from this field, along with.
Okay.
So, when these issues were presented, I wanted to talk about equity and measurement because
Mm-hmm.
we have accommodations for every type of thing you can imagine. If you need something in multiple languages, we could do it. It's a computer
Right.
adaptive
Yeah.
test. We had 35 translated dictionaries. We had an illustrated glossary. So in case none of those languages were appropriate, you could use pictures. We had Braille. We had read aloud stuff. But why is there no
Is there
accommodation?
sign language?
Yes, there is ASL. So everything. So if you had one of the well-known uh, requirements for accessibility, we could meet that. But what about an assessment that's not accessible because the essay that you're reading is in no way relatable to your life story? What if you are so there? And there's bias and review committees for things like that. But in general, on a large scale, why are we looking, why aren't we treating where you came from and creating the same amount of equity and ability to
Right. This is
have the
where
same testing experience as
this is
somebody who has limited sight?
this is where
So
sort of being able to choose your topic of an essay to an extent would help, I think.
yeah,
Right?
I brought that up. So there's issues with that too. So people are really bad at picking what they think they'd be good at. It turns out they're really bad at it. So you have to
Oh.
There's
And
a you got to
in
find the right
In
balance.
Poland usually you have, when it comes to essays, they usually relate to, usually when it's like, I'm gonna give the high school example, like with the Polish language, which is like a subject, you have to write an essay about the books that were being read and discussed in class. So I guess that would be more acceptable, no?
So okay, so a big difference. Well, I don't know. So the tests that you take at the end of the year within your
Yeah.
school are different than the standardized tests. So I was working for a testing consortium, meaning that any of the states involved in that, they're taking the same assessment, kind of. So it was fully computer adaptive. So it assigned you an item based on your performance of the previous item. So it had an adaptive algorithm, so it could
Hmm.
which is cool, right? Because it's got to measure a bunch of standards at different levels of depth. So I'm not just measuring whether or not you can do fractions. I also have to measure it at multiple different levels of Bloom's taxonomy.
Okay.
And so I've got to meet a blueprint. I've got to find items that match your ability, and then also have some ability to give you a choice. It's not impossible, okay? It's just there'd be a learning curve to teach kids. So kids are taught how to take tests for a reason. Part of it is so that your school looks good, but part of it so that they don't freak
Yeah.
out. It really is so that they don't have too much of a cognitive load, so that they're just like, I am. Are you testing whether or not they can interact with the test, or are you testing whether or not they know the
Though
knowledge?
of
That's a
course,
fine line. So if you give people too much choice, that can freak them out. But I did not claim to have the answer. I just wanted to start the conversation with
right.
my technical advisory committee of over 20 experts from all over the country in my field. And I was told
Okay.
that there are more important things to focus on right
Like
now. So if
let's
that
make
tells you.
also, let's just clarify one thing. When you say tests, you mean like ABC tests
So now there are, that's part of it. So,
or written
um,
tests, like you
both.
written.
It's
Okay.
mixed. It's mixed. It's all on the computer. So there are now things called innovative item types. So with now that things are on a computer, you might have where you might be dragging and dropping things into a bucket. You might be manipulating an actual graph. Um, you might be using a graphing calculator. Uh, there's lots of different ways that you can interact,
And what
which
about like
again,
writing a short
there are
essay thing?
essays, yes,
Okay.
and there are essays in math and ELAs. There's written parts of both, right, where you're going to have to write about those things. So yes, there are, and they are called performance tasks. So you've got your main part of your assessment, which are your innovative item types. So it could just be a 4 option multiple choice. It could be a drag and drop. It could be matching, any sort of fun thing. And then there's the written part. And so it tends to be the written parts where, as you would imagine, we see more variation. And then you get into the arguments about, so a lot of the items are AI scored and a lot of them are human scored. And people argue, well, there you can eliminate bias with the AI scored item. Okay, except for there was a human that programmed that AI.
Yeah,
You
right.
don't think
Yeah.
those biases came into the scoring algorithm? So it's just going to have, it's going to be where it's going to be
Yeah, people sort of
accurate.
assume that AI is free of bias when that's not exactly how it works.
It's definitely
Um,
not. But yeah, so there are. That's a conversation I would love to have. I don't know the answer. I don't know, but I
right.
wanted to start having it. And I was roundly pushed out. So between those two things, between my boss being a
So,
monster who didn't care and the TAC not either, I can't do it. The states
yeah.
care. I'll give them that. The states did care.
Oh. So, to round us back into the affirmative action side of things purely, what is So what you're saying is it's actually not permissible for a university to say we had two candidates, one was a white person, one was a person of color, and they both had identical scores, and we've chosen based on um, the circumstances of the background of one of candidates that the candidate should be the one admitted.
So you can consider the background. You can't consider the race. If it comes down
Well,
to a
they're
decision like
sort of,
that,
I mean, they're sort of intertwined, aren't they?
they absolutely are. But when it comes to the law, right? So I'm on the admissions committee. There are things I can say out loud and put down on paper, and there are things that I
Right,
cannot. I can reference their background. I could say I want to give them an opportunity. I could say based on their experience, I think that they would be a good candidate
right.
for this, or whatever. I can make those arguments. I can hide my decision about a racial bias one way or another within
Because,
that response. But what I can't say is we're going to take this person because they fill out that quota
right,
that we're
because
trying to hit.
technically speaking, it's it's sort of true, isn't it? Like it is due to circumstances because racism creates the circumstance that is supposed to be uh sort of ameliorated.
Yes,
Ameliorate.
but
Yeah.
I do want to still, and so one of my mentors in this field, Geronda Hughes, she is faculty emeritus at Howard University, and one of my closest friends. It was her father who was involved in the
Right.
Florida lawsuit. She frankly was the one that was just like, don't forget about those poor white kids too, because I sometimes get caught up thinking that it's just people of color,
Yeah.
specifically black people, but poor white kids get screwed over in a very unique and terrible way as well.
As well,
So
right.
even so, and a rich people are always going to be chosen first, and if they're not, they can buy their way in. So to be
So
honest with you, I don't really care about what's happening with rich people of any color. I care about what's happening to the middle class and below.
right, the working class. So
Yeah.
what happens if there's a really poor white candidate and a really poor candidate of color that sort of find themselves in a spot of competing for a spot at
I can't say that'd be. Again, it's going to be case by case, and
yeah, I
think
mean
it's
I
really
assumed it
rare
always
though.
gonna be case by case
But
when it comes to
I always think it's rare though. I just want to make it clear that like this is not an everyday thing where
yeah,
people
of
are like,
course.
oh my gosh, we're down to these two. That's
Yeah.
rare. So when people do make that argument, that's not happening very often.
No,
And
I assume there will be a lot of examples like this
if
in
it
a
comes
week.
down to two, right?
No,
If it comes
I
down
mean
to
when it comes
two,
to argumentation, I assume
oh,
it
I know they
to
will.
come up
Oh yeah.
in a week. So that's
Oh,
why
I would
I'm
assume that that's largely what they're going to be doing. I
yeah.
can also, I would also argue, and I'd stake actual money on this. If
Mhm.
it truly came down to two students, they're going to
Yeah.
accept both. They're
Uh,
going to
okay.
accept
Yeah.
both.
Okay. I think
Now, if
that's
you've got two groups of 30, maybe not the same. But if it comes down to
yeah.
two, they're going to accept both. And just that,
Because I
that
assume
conversation, if
that
someone's trying to argue with
even
you, not in good faith.
yeah, I assume that's yeah, I assume that's what will happen. I assume that would not be a problem because it's not like there's a lack of physical space to sort of admit people, you know?
No, and you also, so I feel like a lot of the people that have these arguments also aren't familiar with admissions procedures in general with a college. So a university is going to oversell their freshman class. Okay, they're going to over admit because a lot of people aren't going to show up. There's going to be a
Well, there's
percentage.
also going to be dropouts as well along the way.
Yes, of course. So any sort of absolute argument that anyone tries to throw to say this now has ruined, okay, it's not, no decision like that is ruining anyone's time on either side, whether you didn't get in and you should have, or you got in and now you can't hack, whatever. You can correct course, you can course correct from that. really easily. It's not a life or death thing, with very few exceptions. And most of those exceptions are still coming from people that have a desire to be a Stanford law grad, or they want to be a U of M doctor. Okay. Those people are the ones that care that much about where they go for the, because otherwise you would just be like, oh, I didn't get in.
I'll
I'm going to go
just
to another school and reapply.
I guess I guess I'll just go to my second choice because usually people have free choices to
Right.
begin
It's
with.
not uncommon. It's not.
I would say that it's standard actually for people to have free choices. The first choice
If,
school, the second, and even third.
yeah. Because even if you think, so that, like the example from the girl from Basis, did she get accepted to Harvard? Of course she got accepted, right? She was published before she graduated with Harvard professors. But the issue is not her getting accepted. The issue is money. She couldn't
Right?
afford it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stanford gave her money. Harvard was just like, no, we are only giving money to poor people these days. We don't care about your academic prowess. We are only giving money to
So she
poor,
was
potentially smart kids.
not poor, but not rich enough to afford the university. Okay.
Correct. And
Yeah.
you that that's tricky too, because it's a lot about the money, because it's really not that hard to get accepted to a lot of places, but a lot of people can't afford things and need that scholarship. So when you look at affirmative action, and this is just for when while you're researching this in the next week, kind of try to delineate between affirmative action and the money that they're giving you and the acceptance rate,
Right. Yeah. Hmm.
because there it's you can get waitlisted as well, but there's so much room to play. It's also not that hard, even at a big university, if you really wanted to go somewhere, to call a professor. So let's say I'm teaching in the College of Ed, and you really want to come to where I'm teaching, and you didn't quite get accepted. If you email me and we strike up a conversation, and I am like, I've got a feeling about this person, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to call the head of the department. I'm going to be like, hey, I'm sending you this email. I need you to reverse the decision on this applicant. And
That
you know what they're
happens.
going to do? It happens all the time in undergrad and grad school. It happens all the time.
So
It's not a for sure way of doing it, but you just,
so
like a
did
no doesn't necessarily mean you're never going to get into that program.
so did the person that sued try this route?
I doubt it. I don't remember why they were so into that case. I need to look it up again, because I don't. To be honest with you, it's been 20 years.
Damn.
Ooh, they used
It's a
150 points.
huge topic, affirmative action.
It is. And
Although I
ooh, that panel. The fact that our bestie is on there gives
yeah
me
yeah, and we don't know what her position is, but I I will take all this into consideration and sort of research all of it, but I sort of mm, based on the conversations I've seen so far on affirmative action, I'm predicting it to go in a more simplistic direction, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
she doesn't strike me as one for nuance,
Like,
unless it suits her.
because the argument that I've heard about affirmative action is, oh, if group X is mistreated, let's say black people, and um, then how do we know if the situation's been equalized? And how do we know when enough's been enough? Aren't we just perpetuating a system in which people are just getting in for the sake of equalization?
So
I'm
my response
accepting
to
this
that
to
would
go
be,
this route.
yeah, I think that that is exactly what it's going to say. And I think the argument would be, well, that's not what's happening. And generally, when people are just filling quotas like at U of M, they have to stop doing that. It's not that level of a zero sum game. And it's also, what do you like when you say, like, is it enough? Like, when do we stop? Meaning, like, the implication being like, you only want to do as much as necessary for you to alleviate the look of guilt for stuff that's happened in the past. Like, what does enough to you mean? What would enough be? Define enough. Slash,
Right.
at the same time, keeping the status quo. Why is that better? Like,
There's
what?
there's
I,
there's
the
there's there's also one thing that I've been thinking about that I'm not sure if it's taken into account on university level admission, affirmative action. Like, if we have because there's been an argument from Destiny, of all people. You're familiar, probably.
yes.
Okay. So he basically said no. So now women are getting a lot more degrees, a lot more into schools than men. So should we introduce an affirmative action for men?
So let's talk about where that argument came from. Let's talk about it because this is fun.
Yeah.
I know where this argument
Although
comes
I
from.
know what that made me feel and think, and I don't know if the argument that I'm about to tell you is even taken into consideration. So from my perspective, even if more women graduate, the question is, does it translate into similar percentages when it comes to how people actually are treated in life and succeed in life or not? If that makes sense.
Well, it certainly doesn't translate to women being paid more, and
That is basically what I'm asking. Does it
would want more women to
change?
go because then they could keep underpaying all of us.
Interesting.
So really, they should be arguing to keep more women in college so that they can keep underpaying us. However, they're dumb, so they're not going to think of that. But what they're going to do is use the DeSantis argument as to why
Right.
he's looking
Oh, this
into
wait, the
the colleges in
DeSantis that
Florida.
the DeSantis that had a Facebook campaign reveal. Okay, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep, that one.
the argument came from him.
So it came from Claremont, the Claremont Institute, that was fed directly to him
Okay.
because all of these terrible laws, everything that's closed-minded and gross, is coming out of Claremont. Okay, which is very highly related to where I went to undergrad, which is why I'm saying these things with such great certainty. I
Okay.
also know some of the people that wrote some of that legislation, unfortunately. That was all composed by Claremont, okay, and given to DeSantis. I don't even think DeSantis believes half of the stuff that he is signing. It's all coming out of Claremont Institute.
Well, he is a
And that,
pretty hateful person.
yes, it is to keep people stupid. So why aren't we taking guns out of the hands of people and doing something about school shootings? Because we want people to be afraid and take their kids out of schools because we don't want people educated. So same thing with all of us pesky women getting these ideas and wanting to do our own thing. So the same reason that slaves, chattel slavery, not a big supporter of education. Why is that? Because education makes you think about stuff, question stuff, and not stay in line. So let me give
Yeah.
you an actual reference about this.
Mm-hmm.
The authors are Hart and Risley, Risley. Those are the two. Those are the authors' last names. The name of the book is called Meaningful Differences,
Right.
uh, and it's longer. I don't know if you're familiar with this,
Also,
but this was.
I'm gonna apologize. I have to do the trans-related stuff while we discuss
You do
these.
you. You do you. My hormones are on my hip from a patch. Okay. Um, there's a lot. We like HRT is this is the HRT friendly space. Um, so Hart and Risley wrote this book, okay, called Meaningful Differences,
Right.
and they looked at the word count of children that grew up in different levels of socioeconomic status homes. Not surprisingly, student that grew up in houses where the parents were blue collar had a lower level, fewer number of words in their vocabulary. Additionally, their vocabulary was more directive. So instead of saying, have you looked outside today? Do you think you need a coat? It was directive. It's raining, get your coat. These are the things that they found.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
This was persistent, and these differences in word counts persisted, okay, over time. So at one point, one of their suggestions was to just take all the kids that were in low SES homes and just put them into higher SES homes for 3 years. Just take them away from their families. Just take them away. Let them learn these big words and then come back. What? So that was in, I think, 95. This came out. So this book, the results of which are not really challenged, right? We know that there are different numbers of or different levels of vocabulary words that people know, and the types of those words, and those words that they know do absolutely direct where they're going to go. What
Well, yeah, especially since, from what I know, at least in Poland, um, the word counts towards the score. So the less words you use, the worse you do.
well, and that's not surprising, right? It's not at all surprising that a more limited vocabulary, a more limited understanding, a more limited ability to form your thoughts, understand your thoughts, and verbalize your thoughts is going to keep you where you are. It's going to maintain the status quo.
And it's also maybe, I'm not sure if it's unrelated, but also your vocabulary will also affect how you will be treated in interpersonal situations, etc.,
Yes, and
etc.
how you respond, right? So are you used to arguing back and having a conversation, or are you used to being told what to do and you just accept it and do that and don't question it? Because if you're building masses to work in the industrial world, kind of like how our
Then you
education
want
system
obedience,
here started,
basically.
you want that obedience. And men want that obedience from women too, so that they could be told what to do and told not to get a divorce and all of those things.
Right,
So
yeah.
the desire to prevent education that is happening from the GOP right now and the right all over the world is really gross and transparent. It is a transparent shit show, pardon my French. It is a transparent shit show. We all know what you're doing. You're trying to make people dumb so that we will either become sheep or no one will take us seriously so that we can't argue. So anytime somebody is trying to make an argument to restrict education, I call bullshit on anything that you stand behind in addition to that conversation. That's just me.
I mean, I think it's reasonable.
But
this is where I will, as an aside, sort of praise from what I know of the German system, where you sort of have, you can reach a career through a few separate different routes. You can go to a university, or you can just go to a job, at which job you will receive the training that is the equivalent of going through the university, and you can rise through the ranks by gaining the education that you. I really think that's a good system.
I agree. I 100% agree. I remember arguing for that. I think I don't know if it was a presentation that I did or if it was a debate panel at AERA, the American Educational Research Association. But that conversation has been going on in the United States for at least the last 15 years about the German model. Because after TIMSS, which was the third international math and science study in 1995, and then it was repeated in 98, everyone wanted to know how we were going to rank all of these countries. And they looked at teacher preparation, teacher backgrounds, student backgrounds, everything. They had proxies for socioeconomic status. They looked at everything. Plus, they had 2 sets of test scores. And Singapore came out on top. And so that's when everyone became obsessed with what is Singapore doing.
Right.
And, when we try to generalize anything that's happening in any other country, it's just like, well, first of all, that's not going to work here because people still believe that states make the best decisions when it comes to education. And I'm going to just go ahead and argue with that. But there's this like school choice, there's this choice, right? The local choice that gets in the way of having a succinct set of standards. That's why people hate the Common Core without even understanding what the Common Core is, because it's not actually a curriculum. It's just a set of standards saying you should probably be able to do this stuff at this grade level. How you decide to teach it, that's the curriculum, and there are problems within the curriculum. I digress. It's easier in a country with large amounts of top-down control to force people through a really high quality education. And yeah, they did have some novel stuff in some of their textbooks.
Yeah.
But we're also not special. So the US thinks that we're really special and like nothing would apply to us. But we're not. But also we are, because we really have mastered being assholes. We really have taken
Oh my
that to the
goodness.
next level.
We have a comment here. I'm not so sure about vocational learning as in Germany, but I'm not an educator. So, like, I had a friend from Germany, and she basically said that she was studying to be a sort of person that would work in embassies all around the world, and she didn't sort of, I think, make it to university to do the thing, but she could start in a lower rank within the job and climb up to reach the same level as if she did the university. And I do think that it's a good system because it gives you more than one route to reaching a goal that you can set for yourself.
Of course.
Yeah.
I think that's how most things should be. That's what they found. That's why they try different types of curriculum to teach people math. That's why there's row multiplication and lattice multiplication.
Yeah.
And why some people look at lattice multiplication and think, why on earth would you do that? I'm one of those people. But it also makes sense instinctively to a lot of kids whose brains work
differently.
in a different way than mine does.
And I think it also therefore makes sense to give people many different routes to the same outcome.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's what the original point and hope was for affirmative action, was to provide additional routes
for people. Yeah.
But when you think about, we're not good at providing routes for people in the United States. Have you looked at our train system? Have you thought about maybe ever why we don't have a good train system? It's because rich people don't want to share the space with poor people and allow poor people to be as mobile as they are.
Oh.
So we're not good at providing routes and pathways for people here.
You can criticize Poland for more, but it does have a pretty good public transport.
It does. I spent a lot of time in Czech Republic and Germany, and I did get to spend some time in Poland, and I love it there.
Where did you go?
I was just in Warsaw.
Oh, Warsaw. Okay. Warsaw has a pretty good public transport system. I live in Warsaw, so it's we did a whole thing in May about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Yeah. Oh, what are some of the worst arguments that you predict will come up on this panel from the opponents to affirmative action?
It's going to be the zero-sum game, I think, is going to be the most that you hear. And then there's going to be people trying to, I suspect at least one time you will hear the term reverse racism, which is not a thing. You're going to hear that. It's reverse racism.
Well, it's pretty intimately tied to the zero-sum game, the reverse racism argument.
What else do you have to argue besides? I mean, if you are going to seriously argue to not provide a way for your fellow humans to share and rise up in the same way that you are, then yeah, you're in that zero sum mindset. I do think that those things are mutually exclusive. I don't think that you can say, I don't want to give people an equal chance. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Well, what if I can't buy bootstraps in my part of town? What if they don't sell them here?
Well, it's also physically impossible, but
Besides the fact that it's physically impossible, that it is one of the dumbest statements that I've ever heard, and that most people who use that argument probably don't even know what a bootstrap is. There you have it. But I have to run in about 10 minutes, so I do want to just be thoughtful of your time. First of all, this was great. I loved having this conversation. Ring me up anytime. I'll chat about anything. But is there anything else that you want to know from me, or is there anything in chat that I did not answer?
Yeah, if we could have like a general, because it seems like the topic is sort of thought about in a could we have a breakdown of possible scenarios when it comes to admission and affirmative action? Most common case scenarios. Ones that are not super rare but happen quite a lot and are examples of affirmative action.
Okay, so I think a general statement would be that the intended use and application of affirmative action when it comes to university admissions works pretty well until it goes from being intentional desire for diversity to matching a quota so that you can have a
I expect for people to ask, so what's the meaningful difference between these two?
So if you are applying affirmative action to meet a quota, that means that you have a number in your head, a percentage of your student population that you want to meet that stratification, right? I want there to be, but maybe you even want it to be representative of the US as a whole. Maybe you have an altruistic goal for this quota, okay? Let's say it's not a nefarious goal, but you've got numbers and you want to target that.
Yeah.
Well, that's not really reality, and there's a reason that we call it a sample, and there's a reason that there's error in statistics. Okay, there's error. It's
what if it's a quota that's between X and Y? We'd preferably one between X and Y.
So if you have a quota being a range, even my question then would be, so if I was asking the institution or somebody who was arguing for this, I would say, why do you want there to be a that is going to force your hand into making decisions between person A and person B based on their whatever the deciding.
What if the person is right? A real sort of fighter against inequality and says the quota is dictated by the fact that this many people are disenfranchised, and we'd sort of like to remedy that by accepting at least X amount of people.
So again, I don't know that it should be focused on acceptance. I think it should be so if you wanted to have a thoughtful affirmative action, take away a quota, okay? Take away a quota. That's not something that you necessarily need a metric on. And anyone who is saying the one for onesies, I didn't get in because this person did, well, then you're dealing with a quota, and that's not how it should be put in place here. It should be about ensuring the ability for everybody to have a fair shot, okay? Right. You're still going to be evaluated at the end of the day by what you bring to the table, what you've done in the past, how hard have you worked, and if there are institutions that are only bringing you in because you fill a quota. They're not in good faith trying to have you as a student. They don't care if you learn. They want to have a United Color of Benetton brochure to hand
Right.
out to people to make more money. Okay. So if you are talking about a quota, those people don't care about bettering anything anyway.
Right.
And so,
Right.
yeah, don't argue for a specific percentage. The argument here should be towards, again, making sure that everyone can be at the the initial place to even apply,
Right.
so that you're not cast out of something because of your religion, gender identity, race, ethnicity,
Right.
right? It's to be not kicked out. It's so that we can all be considered, right?
Yeah.
That's what we want. We want everybody to be, if you folks, all of you folks over there, you want to study psychometrics, like, come on over. We need more people in this
Yeah.
field. In my opinion, we need more women of color. We need more Black women making decisions in education, in my opinion. Would I ever make a policy decision or a hiring or an admission decision to do that based solely on? No, that would be ridiculous and not helpful. And that's where the bad faith arguments that you're going to get are going to come in.
So I
It's going to
guess.
be the quotas, the percentages, and the when are we done. I would say wouldn't you I would have such a huge problem with that question. I would be like, well, I don't think that we have any indication because we barely started. What do you mean, when are we done? I mean, like, talk to me in like 500 years.
Right. So yeah, I understand because uh, it's also up to how many people actually apply. But um, so I guess the affirmative action in applications to colleges and universities starts with, for example, making the university admittance brochures open to people that could potentially be
Yeah.
deterred by.
Are you and other things too? Okay, so when and you have a college counselor at every high school, and this is private, charter. There are people whose entire
Mhm.
job it is to help kids that are applying to college go through that process. Okay, schools will court. They will try to bring in school counselors from schools that they deem to be desirable. Are you bringing in the right college counselors? Are you making sure that those people are on your lists? Did you get like Thomas Jefferson High School, like in downtown Detroit? Did you send? Are they on the email list? Are they even
Yeah.
on the distribution
And
list?
sometimes
Do you,
even those,
it,
I'm not sure if that's myth or true, that those counselors will tell you what are your chances of getting where.
they absolutely will, and you can look at, like, so for basis, they brag about it. They brag that they have 100% acceptance rate
So
to, like,
does
their
bias
college.
happen with those counselors when they look at a female student and and think you probably shouldn't go there because STEM is not for you, or
I'm certain that that happens, but then that's a problem with a bad school psychologist or counselor, not necessarily
a
the
systemic
overall.
problem?
Well, I mean, it is though, right? Because they're completely underpaid and it's kind of a thankless job. And so, but by and large, those people are there because they love those kids. They love those kids. They love their job, and they're not generally going to be. Now, is there going to be some old school minded person, some like old timey minded person who's just like, yeah, I don't think that you Missy, I don't think you'd be real good in that position. You need to be studying. But does that? I'm sure it happens. Is it?
But it's not statistically significant.
Right.
Okay. All right.
My dog is saying hello. I
Oh,
don't know if you can see
hello.
him.
Oh, that
Oh,
one a big.
there he is.
Wow.
Now he's scratching, but he was the one that was. I don't know if you could hear him in the background.
It was pretty quiet.
He wants his dinner.
Oh, we have one last thing too. A
Sure.
possible reason for a quota that isn't mechanistic for its own sake. Some universities simply wouldn't meaningfully admit AA students otherwise. So would a fallback low bold quota so that hand isn't pushed into compromises in quality be a bad idea. A quota as a goal unto itself, obviously a bad idea. Is the question here.
So, okay, I know, I'm just trying to, okay, so first of all, you need to really think about your motivations if you're determined to get into a place that's going to be making their decisions based on quotas, and it might compromise your ability to go there, right? Or if you know that that's their behavior, why do you want to go there? So, like, think
Well,
about your
it's
own.
probably usually the reputation of the school and the diploma that comes
Right.
with it.
So you might want to question what you thought about the reputation of that school. Because do you really want to be surrounded by a bunch of people that are going to be assholes, and you know that they're assholes?
Right.
Do you really want to share a name with them? Like, that's a personal issue with your own status and what you think about those things. Personally, that's my opinion. Um, there's no situation here that's going to be perfect. I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to err on the side of things that give more people more opportunities, because truly it's not ever going to be at the loss of specifically the people that you're going to be arguing
Right.
with, because they probably already got what
Because
they wanted.
I'm not sure if we'll be able to get into it because usually the big, which is why I ask what the specific scenarios are, because I am 100% sure that one of the main arguments is going to be why should we let a person in that does not deserve to be let in?
I would ask them to define deserve, and who and how are they to say who is deserving
Right,
of
because
what.
that's why I ask if there are, for example, situations in which someone has like a either lower score or a low thing on the exam, etc., and they are being, as part of the affirmative action, accepted anyway in order to sort of give them a shot. In which case, the argument would be, well, their score was lower, so they don't deserve to be in. Which I am sure will come up
I'm
100%.
sure that it will, but then at the same time, if we don't have affirmative action, that's also going to keep out a lot of those poor white kids. Like, do they understand that too? Because, like, test scores are not perfect. They're not the only thing. There's a reason that you
Yeah,
submit a portfolio.
I mean, we
So
went through some extreme examples of being just not being able to tackle a job to help the family and study and keep the score super high. So these things will happen.
yeah, they will. I think that people are what I'm anticipating all of these folks arguing fake scarcity and rage farming over the fact that
And of
poor white people
course,
are going to be denied college, and it's just like y'all aren't going to college anyway, just like y'all aren't picking stuff and building things in Florida.
okay,
So stop acting like people are coming and taking your jobs. They're not taking your jobs. They're not taking your spot at the university because y'all weren't showing up anyway.
all right,
That's just my opinion.
okay.
But I
So I
do
guess,
need to.
yeah, I'm not gonna keep you. I really thank you for being
No,
here.
this was great. Anytime, and I'm around. I'm around all week, so if you
You can have a
think of
follow up.
something,
Yeah,
yeah, if you think of something, and I'm always on.
I always think of something.
Okay,
Okay,
sounds great. Well, thank you so
thank you
much.
very much.
Enjoy
Thank
the
you,
rest of your evening.
thank you.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.